All right, so then if everything's gone well so far, we're going to come out and do the pre-flight portion. Like I'd mentioned earlier, this should be your second pre-flight of the day. If you had the chance to get to the airport before the check ride even began, you can do like a quick walk around and check anything that might be messed up on the plane and have maintenance work on it while you're doing your oral. But now we're going to come out and the examiner will often kind of observe you doing a check ride. The big starting point is going to be your checklist here. They want to see you having this in your hand the whole time, using it as you go through. So then we'll come around and start to get into a pre-flight, which that'll be airplane specific. Obviously, you just want to follow your checklist. But some things that an examiner will do is they're going to start asking you about your airplane specifically. So like when we look at this one, we open up our cowling, and they're going to literally point at something, like the vacuum pump here, and they'll ask you like, what is that? They'll point at something else. What is this? What is that? And one that always gets students is the antennas on the plane. They know there's a comm antenna, they know there's a nav antenna, but they don't know an ELT, all that stuff, but they don't know which one is which. And the examiner will kind of trip you up on it. Usually not a make or break. They're not going to fail you because you didn't know which antenna was which. But again, the smoother we can make this check ride go, the more forgiving they'll be on other mistakes and just the more professional you're going to look. Some of the key things that we've already talked about, like the antennas and, parts of the airplane. Another consistent one is going to be the document location. So in this airplane, we got our POH sitting right here. We've got the registration and the airworthiness certificate, weight and balance, operating limitation, all that stuff is going to be in the POH as well. So making sure you can actually identify where those are at in the plane, and obviously making sure they're there. But an examiner is going to come out and they're going to, where is the, the current weight and balance information? And then you got to pull up this, usually it's a dusty old book that never gets touched, and you've got to go thumb through it and find usually the new pieces of paper, which you can literally see. These are probably the weight and balance sheets right there. And being able to identify that relatively quickly is going to be just something that'll make you look a little bit better. And again, we can do that on our initial pre-flight in the morning before the check ride, make sure that stuff is there as it should. All right, now I'm starting the pre-flight. So we've already checked our documents and all that type of stuff, but we're going to climb up and we're going to turn on the electrical system. So I'm going to turn on my master switch and anything I want to check. So like the landing light, anti-collision, the nav lights. And then I'm going to do a quick walk around here with the electrical system on, check all that stuff, and then shut it off to save the battery. So when we start up, our starter has as much battery power as possible. Looks good. And I'm going to get back up in there, shut off that master switch to save the battery. Shut off the landing light, which I don't need. I'm going to shut off my nav lights. We don't need them during the daytime. And then now I'm going to, in this airplane, going to extend flaps to full. And then I'm going to grab my fuel testing tube, which is right here. So we got flaps full. Again, making sure when you extend those, make sure nobody was near them, because otherwise it'll dig into your shins and stuff. And then now that the battery master is off, we don't really have as much of a time limit on this. We can take our time, follow our checklist. And in our airplane, we have a nice flow that goes around the airplane and follows the checklist. So then I'm going to get into that. All right, and then this is a Cherokee 140, a 1975. So I'm going to be following this checklist here, which adheres to the POH of the plane. You'd want to do the same thing for your airplane, making sure you're following the POH checklist to properly pre-flight it before you begin. I'm going to run through one on this Cherokee 140. Right flap. So the things I want to check on a flap here are going to be, I'm going to push it down, and I'm going to check my pivot bolts, the hinges where it's actually on, making sure that all those bolts look good. I'm going to check the push rod here, which is actually how you extend it and retract it. And then I'm going to lightly lift up and make sure it stays in place. Next, we're going to come on out, following the checklist, to the aileron. I'm going to check these pins, make sure that they're not getting all rusty or worn out or anything. They look good, and they're both there, obviously. Making sure this fully moves with flat hands. A lot of people pinch it, and on this airplane, I don't see an example of it, but a lot of times you'll see all this bent up metal because people pinch it and force it. So we're just going to lightly lift with flat hands. See the yoke in there moving. That all looks good. I like to do a general crouch down, look underneath, make sure there's no big dents or any big gashes in the air. On the checklist, we're going to be having the main strut here. So the things I want to check on this are going to be the wheel itself, making sure that we've got good treads, with no white threads showing. That would be a wear indicator that we would need a new tire. I'm going to there's checking a safety pin here to make sure it's still in place. Again, nothing odd sticking out here. I'm going to check the brakes. The pads have life. The rotors look good, not warped, no damage or anything. The strut in this one is supposed to be about 3 1/4 inch, which we usually just measure with our fingers. Looks like there's plenty of silver showing there. Then I'm going to come up, check the fuel, no contaminants, it's all blue, no clear layers, nothing like that. Since it's all clean, we can just dump it right back into the airplane. If that was contaminated, we want to go dispose of it in the proper, usually an airport will have like a garbage can or some sort of a vessel you're supposed to dump it into for contaminated fuel, which will be obviously airport specific. Air inlet here looks clear and open. That's going to be the fresh air for the cabin to help keep us cool today. Opening this up. I'm going to check with my checklist, make sure I'm not forgetting anything. Yep, looking good. We're going to go ahead and check our oil. And in this airplane, we want to see it between the 6 and the 8. It's just above the 6. Looks like to me about 6.5 or so that's good. Gonna make sure it's snug. Everybody always over tightens that, and then as the airplane runs, it makes it tighter and tighter, and then it's impossible to get it off. So it's just till it's snug. Checking, making sure there's nothing odd sticking out, like no spark plugs hanging loose, no leaking fuel lines, no pools of oil. Those are all common ones that we've noticed in the past. Making sure there's no bird's nest or anything. If planes have been sitting in a hangar for a long time, birds like to nest up in there. Or wasp nests is another one that we'll run into. I don't see any of that stuff, and everything looks like it's in place. So now I want to properly make sure this is closed and latched. Looks good. Coming around, checking the leading edge of the prop here. No nicks or dents. I've been told not to run my hand across it because it can cut your hand, but I'd rather have the cut and notice the notch than not notice at all because I was patting it down or something. So I just run my finger across it still. Maybe one day I'll change my mind. Okay, alternator belt back here is good. Landing light, and then we'll come around to this side where we crouch down and check the nose wheel assembly. Tire looks good. Good thread, or good treads. Mix that up last time too. No threads. This nose strap has plenty of silver showing. And we look good. I'm going to check the fuel sump down here, which is another low point in the fuel system. You'll notice a theme with all these fuel sumps. They're always the low points in the system where things would collect. Yep, no contaminants. It's blue, no clear layers. Dumping that back in since it passed the check. Air intake's clear. Brake rotor looks good. The pads look good. Silver looks good. This wheel looks good, just like the other one with its safety pin on the end. Then I'm going to do my final fuel sump on this airplane. And again, looks good. No contaminants, blue, no clear layers. Dump it back in. We're good to go. Fuel vent's good. I don't know if I verbalized on that on the other wing, but did check it. Static mass. The ram air port looks good. Drain hole, static port. I already checked this during the electrical run around, but we can make sure it's still moving freely. Do my general crouch under, no big damage. Checking the pins on the aileron here. And the yoke still moves with it. Everything looks good there. And here's a great example. You can see where people have pinched this stuff. And we want to avoid that. Flat hands to move it. Because otherwise people pinch it and it gets bent, and then they go to fix it and it gets all warped and messed up. Flaps look good. Checking my hinges. Checking my push rod. Lightly lifting up. Checking my antenna. That's the ELT antenna on this airplane. Looking underneath. The other antennas on the underside look good. They're not hanging loose or anything like that. Go ahead and move this. Watch, there's a pinch hazard right here on the anti-servo tab. Can really get you. Learn that from experience as well. Got all the pins on that, looking good. We got 4 bolts to check on this rudder, and then we got our VOR antennas up here on this airplane. Then I'm going to lift this all the way up, and then we'll check this last bolt right here, which they call the Jesus bolt, because that one bolt right there is giving you control over your elevator or horizontal stabilator on this airplane. And if you lose that bolt, then you don't have control over that, which would be a rough situation. And then we come around, and if there's a baggage door there, you'd want to check it, make sure it's latched and everything, which the 140s don't have that. And then the final step, running through a checklist, because as you'll notice, a lot of it's memorized, so we can just use it and then check afterwards. At the beginning, it's more of a to-do list. Now it's a checklist, and we run through. And it looks like we got everything. All right, you've already passed the oral. You're coming out here with the examiner. He may have already been watching you. You've got a successful pre-flight done, meaning you've got what appears to be a good airworthy airplane. Now let's hop in and go fly. The easy part.